I created this fictional pop star. Her name is Imani, in Goodbye Girl. And she's not a Taylor Swift um, uh, uh, clone by any stretch, but Taylor Swift was a bit of an inspiration for for that character, and that people may not know the exact reason that we have Taylor's version of songs, right? And that was because the her record label in particular a guy named Scooter Braun, owned her master recordings, and she's like, I'm not getting paid sufficiently from these first six master recordings. And he Scooter Braun, I guess, thought she was bluffing when she said, well, if you don't pay me properly, I'm just going to re-record all six albums and re-release them. Well, along came COVID, and she had the time to re-release all six albums, and uh, so she re-recorded them, and she had enough of a following and told everyone, buy Taylor's version. And you know what? People did. So I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. So I've got this Imani character who's in the same boat. She doesn't own her own master recordings, but she doesn't have the time to re-record all of her previous albums. But you know what? Her Scooter Braun in her life is actually her ex-husband. So she'd rather thieves get the money than her ex-husband get the money. So she said, instead of saying, go buy Imani's version of my songs, she tells everyone, go pirate. And she gives the links, and of course that creates financial havoc for her manager. And somebody turns up dead, and the story goes on. Goodbye Girl was not only became timely, but an awful lot of fun to write. So Code Six is the first standalone for quite a while there, and it came about because I'd actually been asked to write a play, and I did write a play, and it was produced here in South Florida. Unfortunately, it was produced and presented 2 months before COVID, which means it never went anywhere, right? The theaters shut down like 3 weeks after the play ran for 5 weeks, but the play was about the world's first personal information catastrophe, which many people don't realize was the Holocaust. Um, because yes, we did have the Anne Frank type of situations where it was neighbor informing on neighbor, and somebody would tell that there were Jews hiding in the attic, and the Nazis would come and take them away. Yes, that definitely happened, but the way the Nazis identified most people who were Jewish was through census data. In the 1938 census, 80 million people were questioned and asked, "Do you have a Jewish grandmother?" And they thought nothing of it, and unwittingly gave away what came to be a tragic revelation, right? Because that data, that answer to that question, was processed through IBM technology to identify who was Jewish. So there were many people who didn't even know they were Jewish who ended up in a concentration camp because somebody else in their family had answered truthfully, yes, they had a Jewish grandmother. Um, so I wrote that play, and then after the play was released, it came to me, wow, there's some really interesting parallels here, sort of that history repeats itself sort of phenomenon, right? Is that we had so many people unwittingly giving up their personal information in the Holocaust that had, catastrophic consequences. And here we are, 80 years later, can't wait to give up our personal data, right? We're all over social media and liking things, and we know, and giving up our everything, all information about us, and posting photographs of our children, and on and on and on. And so I decided, oh, I love this parallel, between the past and the present. And so I created a fictional character, it's a young woman, but she's sort of modeled after my own experience of right. So she's a playwright and she's writing a play about called Watson, which is the name of the play that I wrote about the Holocaust. And her father is a tech genius who and she uncovers a secret about um, data mining through her own father's business while she's writing this play, and that's the story that plays out, is what sort of her applying what she learned about the world's first personal information catastrophe during World War II to the modern day catastrophe that we are on the brink of with the revelation of our own personal information through social media. Now, in the most recent book, which just released a couple of weeks ago, Grave Danger, and Andy and Jack are married. They now have a 9-year-old child, but I will tell you that that was a long, long process. I had my agent, my original agent. By the way, I've had this. I had the same agent, the same publisher, and for 25 years I had the same editor, which is really unusual, right? So, but that editor is now retired, but Carolyn was very, very invested in Jack Switek as a character and was almost like a big sister picky about who Jack was going to end up with, right? And so there were a couple relationships in early books that I created for Jack, and she's like, no, she's not the one. She's not the one. And finally, we just sat down and talked about, okay, it is kind of time, for Jack to settle down. This is about 2000. I don't know, it's about the fifth or sixth book in the series. And she pointed out, what about FBI agent Andy Henning? And I'd never thought about bringing her back, but she was in a book called Under Cover of Darkness in 2002. And again, the beauty of her was that she was a rookie in that story, very, very young. And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. And so I reintroduced FBI agent Andy Henning in she breaks off an engagement in Under Cover of Darkness. So that made it even better, right? It made it like, okay, why is she going to come all the way to Florida? She was in Seattle at the time. So she wants to get as far away from Seattle as she can. She comes to Florida, and then a book called Got the Look, Andy and Jack meet. And there were sparks. I felt it when I was writing it. That's a great feeling as a writer when you feel like, wow, yes, this is clicking, and it came pretty easily. And so I kept her around for a couple more novels, and I'm like, you know what? She needs to be part of the cast. She's great. And so now Andy appears without Jack in, I'd say, three or four novels. She's in Under Cover of Darkness. She's in Need You Now. She's in Money to Burn. She's in Cash Landing. So that's four that I can think of that she's without Jack. But for the most part, it's Jack and Andy. And in the most recent, in Goodbye Girl and in Grave Danger, it's really I think the balance has tipped to more about Jack and Andy than it is about Jack and Theo.
Could you just give us a little brief synopsis of the latest book in terms of its plot and from that side?
Yeah, so Grave Danger grew out of, so I was in my daughter was a ballet dancer, and she was dancing in the Boston Ballet's Nutcracker performance in December of 2022. So we traveled up there, and we brought her dog with her, our golden retriever, and I was out walking the dog in Copley Square in Boston, which is right in front of the Boston Public Library, which is a beautiful building. But it was freezing cold. it was 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, uh, but I noticed right in front of the library, there was a group of women protesting. And I thought, my God, they must be very, very ardent supporters or believers in whatever it is they're protesting. And I got closer, and what they were protesting was the murder of Masa Amini, the 22-year-old Iranian beautiful young woman who refused or went outside without wearing a head covering in Tehran and was arrested by the morality police and supposedly, died unexpectedly in custody. Well, that of course led to this huge uprising, which became a worldwide phenomenon where women in protest were cutting their hair, and to the point where it was like at 4 degrees on a December morning in Boston. There was a group even protesting. And I said, I need to write about that. And but I had no way to figure out how Jack was going to fit into that story. And so again, I did kind of tied together my legal work with this and discovered that um, there are lawyers who will represent women who flee countries like Iran or other countries where the woman may feel that they or their children are in danger, grave danger, which is the title of the book, right? So so the premise of grave danger is that a woman flees. She divorces her husband for reasons that if you read the book, you'll find out why. But she divorces her husband and takes her child without the husband's consent to the United States for the betterment of the child and her own life. And as it turns out, from what I learned on the legal side, is that the State Department in the United States, it doesn't matter if it's an abused spouse or an abused child, the State Department will not give aid to anyone who takes a parental child abduction. And so the father in my story sues in U.S. court for the return of the child to Tehran, which creates a very high stakes situation for Jack, who is asked to represent the mother so that the mother does not lose her child, because she will lose her forever if the child goes back to Tehran. The mother can never go back there, and she doesn't know what's going to happen to that child once the child is returned there. So it's about as high stakes as case. It's not a criminal case. It's new territory for Jack, but it's as high stakes as any criminal case he's ever handled, because this is really not literal life and death, but it is life going to be worth living for his client if she loses this case and her child is returned to Iran.
Fascinating. Before we run, once these go up, they stay up. Is there anything upcoming that you already got in the sort of creative already handed in that's been in the creative queue that you want to?
So yeah, I'm on I only once in the last 26 years have I since 1999, it's been a book every year except for one gap in there. So I'm staying on the book a year pace. And Jack Switek will be back in January of 2026.